Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. I guess it must be something in the water, or perhaps it's just that time of year again, but you got some people who are actually trying to resurrect the Black-Brown Alliance talk. Now, for the people who may be new to this kind of discourse, just understand that that whole Black-Brown Alliance thing, it comes from the exact same wrong place as the black folks who thought in the 1960s that opening the door for a bunch of African and Caribbean immigrants was somehow going to help the condition of black Americans, because that's ultimately the reason that black folks were in favor of it. What they thought was these other groups who come from places where they had been experiencing white supremacy and been oppressed by it, they would come to the U.S. and lock arms with us because we have been the most strident, the most aggressive fighters against white supremacy anywhere on this planet. People may not want to hear that, but it's a fact. That's why everybody tries to come here. You go anywhere else on this planet, you're going to find people who are either just deciding that they give lukewarm, passive resistance to white supremacy and whatever racism they face, all the way to countries where the vast majority of people are non-white, and yet they do everything that they can to openly collaborate with their oppressors. This kind of cognitive dissonance simply does not work, and yet that's the foundation that the Black-Brown Alliance has rested on. Because in the United States, up until the 1970s, so-called Hispanics were considered to be white, at least they were classified that way until Richard Nixon decided to change it. And the reality is that there's been a lot who have been trying to get that white card back ever since. What's happened in the wake of this election and the way that so many groups who the Democrats thought were in their pockets who wound up either breaking away from them or just staying home altogether, you got some folks on the sidelines who apparently think that they see some openings for themselves. They think that they spot some gaps, which is what happens whenever a system is in flux. The usual suspects are the ones who are pushing this line about it's time to reconstruct the Black-Brown Alliance. It's the usual suspects, the Urban League, the National Action Network, the Rainbow Coalition, and of course, no discussion about political stupidity within the black community would be complete without the NAACP. The NAACP is basically trying to rebrand itself as a race-neutral organization. It's kind of like the same way that what used to be called the Jewish Anti-Defamation League basically dropped the Jewish and just called themselves the ADL. Well, the NAACP would love to basically do the same thing. I guess they really love it if they could do like AT&T and some of these other companies and just say, you know, NAACP doesn't really stand for anything anymore. Yeah. Back in the day, it used to stand for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. But we've decided that that was a little bit too exclusivist. So what we'd like is just to be called the NAACP, but we want to make sure that everybody understands the letters don't actually stand for anything. You know what? They might as well go ahead and pull a move like that. It would certainly suit them. Now, it's very easy to point out that these guys have never stood for black people in any meaningful way. But of course, we've noticed that in recent years, these guys have been going overboard trying to basically paint themselves as being race neutral. Basically, they're just a plain vanilla, pun intended, civil rights organization. Not really anything to do with black. But of course, as with so many other things, the reason for this shift is money. You see, the NAACP and other organizations, they've got a bunch of boomers, but the boomers are dying out. Gen X didn't really want to join them that much, and everybody after Gen X have basically been leaving the NAACP alone. Sure, you got some would-be social climbers, most of them DNC shills, who like to use the NAACP as their local support base. But as far as what it used to be when they used to have chapters all over the country and a robust membership, those days are long behind the NAACP. So like all these groups, they got money woes. That's what's at the heart of this. They're trying to expand their membership because they need the money. They need the membership dues. There's certainly plenty of precedent for this outside of the NAACP, like the Boy Scouts, for example. Do you know that these guys actually changed their names some years back? They're no longer called the Boy Scouts anymore. They're just called the Scouts BSA. But the biggest change of all that they made is that they now admit girls into the Boy Scouts. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean Scouts BSA. And the reason for that, of course, is manifestly obvious. The Boy Scouts happens to have a much larger profile and name than, say, the Girl Scouts. And that being the case, you might as well go ahead and say, hey, how many of these females would like to go ahead and make the membership dues? Be part of the camaraderie and fun that goes along with getting these stupid little merit badges. That's what the Boy Scouts have been reduced to. Because for many, many years, the Boy Scouts have actually been mismanaging their own finances. All that money that they've been getting, and they've just been basically throwing it away. And speaking of throwing it away, they also had to pay a colossal child abuse settlement a few years back. That's what the Boy Scouts have done, and as a result, they find themselves desperately needing some cash, so they're going co-ed, and they're changing their name and everything else. And this is what the NAACP and these other civil rights groups are also doing. That's what happens when you throw away all of your money. At that point, you're basically going to have to just throw the doors open and say, you know what? Have cash, will travel. And that's the reason why you see the NAACP so eager to claim that abortion is a civil right. And that's the reason why these guys are sticking up for illegal aliens. These guys are sticking up for transgender bathrooms and whatever. Meanwhile, they vehemently and openly oppose reparations. This is what the NAACP has become. And this is the reason why every generation after the boomers have abandoned the NAACP. We're trying to have more black children, not less, so we're never going to be on board with abortion. But the NAACP's endorsement of it is because they're hoping that there's plenty of white women who they can actually get some membership fees from or some money from. These guys are always looking for a handout. And they also see how the government's been bending over backwards to welcome and accommodate all of these so-called asylum seekers from Latin America. As far as the NAACP is concerned, well, these people need someone to speak for them. And we also need to be able to speak for a group who aren't going to endanger our ability to be invited to the cheese and croissant circuit by all of these good white liberals that we want some money from or some face time with. See, with the black grassroots, they understand that what it is that we're representing, that's not going to get you invited to one of those exclusive posh DC parties or get you invited to a private dinner with Senator Who Gives a Damn. But even if we were on board with the NAACP and the rest of these civil rights dead-enders, the question that none of them has enough brain cells to ask is the so-called program or agenda that they're attempting to promote one that their would-be allies are even interested in? You can't have an alliance of one, and if you're attempting to be allied with somebody else, that's not going to work unless they want to be allied with you. Recently, there was a story in ProPublica, and they were reporting on the tension between illegal aliens in the United States and the asylum seekers who were coming up from Latin America. ProPublica reported on one woman, an illegal alien from Mexico, who was angry because she saw that Central American asylum seekers were being given driver's licenses and work permits, and she was mad that she wasn't being given either of those in all the decades, yes, decades, that she's been in the United States illegally. And you also have another illegal alien friend of this woman who claims that her child found a purse at a carnival that seemingly belonged to a Latin migrant. It had a Wisconsin driver's license in it and a work permit issued to a Nicaraguan woman along with $300 in cash. Now, this woman, who's an illegal alien, mind you, she told her boy to turn in the purse to the authorities, but not before she took the $300. And her justification for this? She has 5 children who are legal residents, but she can't get a work permit or driver's license. Well, that's because she's an illegal alien. It's not hard. Yet this is how illegal aliens react to the fact that their being illegal doesn't get them the same privileges and rights as a citizen. And this is the reason why there's such a clash of cultures. When you have countries that don't have a tradition of recognizing the rule of law in any form or fashion and are hideously corrupt, and that unfortunately this acceptance of corruption has filtered all the way down to the bottom level, this is what people assume they can do when they go to other countries. So you see that the illegal aliens problem isn't that these so-called asylum seekers are here. It's that these asylum seekers are getting all kinds of freebies and giveaways, and now they're seeing someone else from the same region and in many cases same countries they're from getting the kind of preferential treatment that previously the illegal aliens have been getting. This isn't resentment on their part as much as it is envy. And not surprisingly, the second illegal alien woman said that she wasn't worried about Donald Trump getting back into the White House or deporting everybody because she believes Trump only wants to deport criminals, not illegals like herself who are only working. Now, it shouldn't shock anyone that this is the case. Remember those racist Latino LA City Council members? They call black children monkeys and all kind of racist rhetoric, but they also disparaged other Mexicans too, if they felt that those Mexicans' skin was too dark or that they looked too Indian. This is what's been going on in Latin America all this time. This is the reason why they left those places, rather than fight to change them. There's a reason that Cortez was able to take Mexico with only 500 men, and the rest of Latin America fell even easier than that. The reason the very people who Trump calls all of these names like criminals, rapists, drug dealers, and such can claim that, well, he's not talking about me, it's because cognitive dissonance is normal in Latin America. The white ruling class, that is the blancos in those places, they treat the brown-skinned people, mestizos, like dirt. And yet they all acknowledge that they have some ancestors in common, but the only time that they ever bring that up is if they're talking about the white ones. Nobody ever talks about whether or not you got some black ancestors in common or some brown ones. That never comes up. It's only brought up in reference to the ruling class. Sure, the Spanish genocidal reprobates who raped the indigenous population and then set up their own European progeny to be the rulers of these lands were a bunch of scumbags, but, they're scumbags in the family tree, so that doesn't make them so bad, right? And this is how people who are not part of white supremacy can run around acting as if they are, because in their minds they've convinced themselves that basically they're a darker shade of white. And while it's true that the Spanish, with more than a little help from the Catholic Church, confused the masses down there, it's also true that in order to con someone, you have to get the mark to con himself. That's how you get Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez running around boldly with her chest saying, just because I have black ancestry doesn't make me black. Just because I have Indian ancestry doesn't make me an Indian. But when it came time for her to say that she wasn't European, she didn't say that at all. She wanted to rule out, well, I'm not Indian, I'm definitely not black. Well, you're not going to sit here and say that you're white, are you? Yeah, that's exactly what she was saying. This is the entire problem. You can't overthrow white supremacy when you have people petitioning to be classified as white, and you can't stop a racial hierarchy when you have people who are practicing internalized racism. You got black politicians who can't wait to sign some sort of mass amnesty, or they're ready to jump out of a window because there happen to be detention centers on the southern border. But whenever you talk about whether or not these Hispanic politicians should be on board with either reparations or even something as basic and common sense as an anti-black hate crime law, all you get are crickets. That's the reason why a black-brown alliance simply cannot work. You got black people who are ready to advocate for the brown ones, but you don't have anybody who's brown in a position of power who's advocating for black people at all. That doesn't work. But the problem goes even deeper than that. You see what happened with the LA City Council, but you also see what's happening with these other groups. This is what's been going on in Latin America for the longest time. A lot of them thought to themselves that basically they had more or less an uneasy normal in the United States, and that they were going to be establishing an identity as classified as white, but the truth of the matter is white supremacy happens to be about power. That's what it's actually about. Much more than skin color. So that being the case, the NAACP can go ahead and pine away to try to resurrect that carcass all they want, because you really don't have a chance of establishing a black-brown alliance when there's not even a brown-brown alliance to begin with. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Shiva Boone, Devin Goodwin, Sa, Ikegas Dorset, and Samora Morris. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.